Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to part 23 of my Joseph Losey season. Today we're going to go to 1973 and talk about A Doll's House, based on the Henrik Ibsen play, starring Jane Fonda, Edward Fox, David Warner, Trevor Howard and Delphine Seyrig. This was all shot on location, set in Norway, so there's lots of snow and people ice skating. This is a play that has been filmed a couple of times, or quite more than a couple of times, and is constantly on stage. Jessica Chastain, for example, is doing it, or about to do it, or has done it recently. Other female actors, Claire Bloom, Liv Ullmann, Julie Harris, Juliette Stevenson, Laurie Metcalf, Gillian Anderson. They've all taken a turn playing Nora. This is a film about kind of a female character who is finally empowered to find out who she is and leave her husband and children to go searching for who she is as a human being. So you can kind of see why it's popular among female actors to have a go at. Again, this is Losey, again, not necessarily going for projects that are going to rake in bundles of cash. Jane Fonda did take a pay cut, because at the time of 1973 I think she was getting paid about $1.25 million for a film, but apparently she took a fairly substantial pay cut. Losey was a little bit dodgy about her politics. She was almost more famous for her political views than her acting, even though she did get an Oscar for Clue, I believe, in 1971. And like all Joseph Losey films, it seems the relationship between him and Fonda and Seyrig kind of became problematic. I'm actually trying to think of the 23 films I've talked about in the Joseph Losey season, whether any of them were completely harmonious. If it wasn't Losey being annoyed at the writers or the producers or the distributors or the actors or the cameramen, he's usually upset at somebody. It was the same cameraman who's done 8 Losey films, but Richard McDonald, his usual production designer, wasn't available, so he had another production designer. There is a nice green hue in some of the buildings, as I say, all shot on location. There was no studio work, and Edith Head, the legend of Hollywood costume design, did the costumes. Michel Legrand did the music. It's a fairly strange film. Again, you could argue Jane Fonda's casting, putting a kind of forward-thinking, progressive woman in the role of, I guess, Ibsen's forward-thinking, progressive woman, is an interesting casting choice. But for, 3/4 of the film, she's not really that forward-thinking. She's very material. She marries David Warner's bank clerk, who eventually becomes the bank manager. She spends money like water. Is that the phrase? And is very materialistic And on the other hand, you have the Delphine Seyrig character and the Edward Fox character, who do care for each other, and Edward Fox wants to marry her. But she has to think of material reasons as well. She's a widow, and she's got and her mother's a widow, and she's got siblings to look after, and so she rejects Edward Fox, who is only a lawyer down his luck. How times have changed, which obviously Edward Fox doesn't take too kindly. And then there's the subject of a secret that Edward Fox knows about something that Nora, Jane Fonda's character, did, and he is willing to go to David Warner about that. So the second half of the film is about the moral dilemma of Jane Fonda's character trying to hide the truth from David Warner and trying to convince Edward Fox not to tell him, and then kind of use Delphine Seyrig to manipulate Edward Fox, I guess, even though she still does have feelings for him and his two children. So it's kind of, there's two kind of stories going on. You could argue for most of the film, the most interesting characters are actually Edward Fox and Delphine Seyrig rather than David Warner and Jane Fonda. Everybody is wonderful, especially Edward Fox. I think Edward Fox wins the MVP as a man who's kind of been rejected and is angry at everybody pretty much. You can actually see a lot of Edward Fox and Jeremy Irons. I think there's a lot of, it just kind of struck me when I was watching Edward Fox's performance in A Doll's House. There's quite a lot of little ticks that Jeremy Irons uses that you can actually see in Edward Fox. David Warner, who obviously sadly we lost fairly recently, is wonderful as he always is, even if he's maybe a little one note. I mean, Jane Fonda isn't great, I would say. I mean, when you consider people like Liv Ullmann have played the part, but certainly in the last kind of 10-15 minutes of the film, Jane Fonda does kind of show something and does kind of settle down. I mean, I've always kind of had a problem with Jane Fonda, just because she just reminds me of her dad so much when I watch her. I just see Henry Fonda in her, which obviously was quite challenging during Clip and Barbarella, obviously. But she kind of pulls the performance back together in the last 10-15 minutes when she does have a wonderful conversation about her decision and what she's going to do with David Warner. Trevor Howard is in fine form as a local doctor with top class facial hair, but Edward Fox wins the facial hair battle. He's got a wonderful beard, and he probably wins MVP. The film itself, I believe, is just available in various DVDs. I wouldn't say it's one of my favourite Losey. It does kind of not suffer, but you do kind of miss Richard McDonald's production design as far as, you know, Losey's kind of obsession with objects and art and painting. There's not as much of that on show. Seyrig at times is wonderful, and at times it's as if she's on cocaine or something, as her eyes are extremely wide in quite a lot of scenes. It's kind of odd, but again, she was not a big fan of what was going on either, especially with Fonda. So as I say, with most Joseph Losey films, there's a lot going on. that wasn't perhaps the most harmonious set in the world. But certainly an interesting little film. I would actually like to see the Liv Ullmann, Erland Jofferson version, but I think that's just on stage. The Claire Bloom version, Anthony Hopkins played the David Warner character, so I'm sure that would be quite interesting as well. So it's obviously a play that resonates, especially with female actors. As I say, it's about a perhaps materialistic woman that has her eyes opened and kind of decides that I maybe need to figure life out by myself without the trappings and kind of the supposed duty that a wife and a mother should have. It's certainly a film worth checking out, but it does have a strange kind of atmosphere. It's a little stiff, but not really in the traditional sense of a filmed play. You know, sometimes filmed plays do feel a little bit stiff and confined. It's not that kind of stiffness. I mean, maybe, I don't know, it's just a little lifeless, I think. But it's still a good solid little 3 out of 5. But it certainly wouldn't be in my top half of the Losey 23 films that I've looked at so far. But certainly another interesting little entry in Joseph Losey's very strange and all over the place canon. So that's A Doll's House from 1973. Please let me know if you've seen A Doll's House and what you think of it. And hopefully you'll join me again for more of Joseph Losey. Part 24 is up next. And it's Michael Caine's turn to work with Joseph Losey. So thanks very much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.